high school. Well, I did go to the Green School in elementary, and Mrs. Dowling was my first teacher there.
Uh-huh.
And then I went through a whole mess of other teachers, Mrs. Featherer and all that. Right on through 8th grade. And then I went to high school at Penns Grove Regional High School. And we played football, WWII.
You did?
No, I didn't, no. I played for the same guys that were playing on the high school team. I played without shoulder pads or helmet on the field, but it was tackle with the same guys that were on the team. So it was always a lot of fun in front of Jimmy Scott's house. He had a nice field there.
Uh-huh.
So, I always liked math to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And high school was, for me, kind of awkward, even though I was having a lot of fun. I was always kind of shy about girls. Mm-hmm. And, you know, and my name at that time was Sonny Jim, S-U-N-N-Y, and I think I told you how I got that name. And I didn't like it anymore. And so Audrey Helke was she was a redhead in my class, and she was one that said, okay, we'll call you Cloudy. So from then on, my name was Cloudy.
Your name was Cloudy, yeah.
By all her friends.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Jimmy was another nickname.
Yeah, I'm not sure that was an improvement, Jim.
No, it wasn't an improvement. But high school was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed high school. One of the things that I remember mostly about that was my mother and I used to sit at the dining room table, this big long table we had with benches for all the kids. And I guess about that time there were 9 of us, or 8 or 9 at that time. And we'd sit at the dining room table and get out the newspaper. And I was taking Latin at the time. And so, of course, my mother having been raised in school by the French nuns at Ursuline Academy in Wilmington, Delaware, they taught French, Latin, German, and all kinds of stuff. And so she was very good at writing and very good at words and things like that. So it transferred over to me. That's the way Ursuline Academy was.
It's a French institute.
It's a French, yeah. And it was a beautiful, beautiful campus up over there in Wilmington, Delaware, on Pennsylvania Avenue. Anyhow, we'd sit there and we'd look for words, American words, where they had a Latin root or Latin derivation of some kind. So I could take it into school and, you know, please the teacher that I knew something about Latin. That was one of my favorite subjects, that and English,
Yeah.
and math. And so I always aced Latin. I was just, we cut out something. Like, for instance, there was a newspaper that had a big article about a raincoat, and it's called Aqua Scuva. It just means water shield, Latin derivation, which I think was a pretty cool name. Anyhow, the other things that I liked in high school, of course, were the dances, and at lunchtime, they would bring in teachers who would teach us ballroom dancing. We learned the foxtrot to begin with, and we learned the Latin dances, the samba, the rumba, and something else. I never did get good at tango, which I love. I love that dance.
the public high school, right?
The public high school, and there were about 700 kids, 700 to 800 kids total, and it was a regional high school, Penns Grove Regional High School, and so that meant all the farm kids came in,
Right.
and for the whole region. And we played football against other farm communities. In fact, I met somebody the other day who was from Pittman, New Jersey, and Pittman was one of our prime targets for trying to win the football game because those kids were farmers and they were tough. Pittman always was tough for us. But I lived in Salem County at that time. In fact, that's where I grew up, was Salem County. And they were from Gloucester County, I think it was. So what else? Some of the subjects I liked, of course, World War II was going on at that time, and we decided, or the school decided, that they were going to replace physics class with aeronautics for the guys that wanted it. And that's what I took, aeronautics. I didn't really know what I was doing. I really didn't. I had no idea what it was all about, but it was fascinating for me at the time because I was just getting used to it. And it was I was always building model airplanes anyhow, and never thought one time why they were flying. I just knew that if I got on the roof of my house and wound up the rubber band and let her go, it would fly.
Right.
So aeronautics then taught me that there's such a thing as lift and drag and yaw, roll, and what's the other one? Elevation. So pitch, yaw, and roll. The different characteristics of flight and how to control that.
Mm-hmm.
So aeronautics was pretty cool for a lot of the kids, and a lot of them decided that because they had taken aeronautics, they wanted to be pilots.
Right.
And so when they graduated, or even before they graduated, they would join the Air Corps, the Army Air Corps at that time, or the Navy, Naval Aviation. And so that's what I wanted to do. I don't know if I mentioned that to you before, but Naval Aviation, we all took the exams for Air Force or Air Corps, which was V6, I think.
You didn't really have an Air Force then.
No, we had the Army.
All right.
Had a lot of
You had
airplanes.
an Army Air Corps, right?
Army Air Corps. And it was either V6 or V12. The other, one of those, I think it was V12 was electronics, avionics. V5 was naval aviation. So I took them all just to make sure it was, I could get what I wanted. And I passed them all. In fact, I got good grades. Funny thing about my grades, some of my grades in the subjects I was taking weren't that hot. Like I might get a D in math, and then I turn right around and beat Ruth Carter at the final exams. I'd get a 96 and she'd get a 95. And, so and it was because I didn't do my homework that they downgraded me.
Gotta do your
And I
homework.
was too busy playing football down at the field.
Not too late for that lesson.
Huh?
You gotta do your homework.
I had to do my homework and I didn't, yeah. But, you know, with English, I always did that. With Latin, I always did that homework. And a couple of other subjects that I took. But math was so easy for me.
Yeah. It was always the exact opposite for me.
Yeah, it just was a natural thing.
Yeah.
And so, and I went through Algebra 1, 2, geometry, trigonometry, and we were just touching on calculus, but we never really got into it. But it was always fun. So anyhow, that took me to the fact that when the kids in December of '43 decided they were going to go in the military before they graduated, the kids in my class, Charlie Maston for one, and others, and they went into the Army Air Corps and became pilots. and I went down to the recruiter for the Navy and I said, okay, I want to be a pilot. And that's when they stopped me cold. It was in the spring of '44. And they said, hey, you're too short. What? And the limit was, the bottom limit was 5'4", 5 feet 4 inches. And I was 5 feet 3 3/4 inches, and they would not bend on that because the war was winding down, and they had a lot of kids that wanted to be pilots who were taller. So I said, okay, I want to fly. How do I do that? And they said, oh, we'll let you fly. We'll make you a combat air crewman. And so as a combat air crewman, I could sit in the back seat of an airplane or in the ball turret or something like that. And I said, yeah, I'll take it. So when high school was over, I have to inject one little thing. Anna Mae Gallert was a cute little blonde. She was an ice skater and just an A student throughout. And I always loved dancing with her, you know, at Fenton Groff's house in the basement. His mother would let us have dances there. So all the kids would go to Fenton's house and have dances. So my mother knew that I liked Anna Mae. But she always said, and there were a lot of girls that I liked. And she always said, Jim, you don't want to have just one. There's safety in numbers, you know. I said, okay.
Well, that's true.
So there was Betty the Body, and then there was Betty Adams lived next door. And then there was Betty Beckham. She was really nice, and she liked going out with me. And I often made sure that I had my sister Ann with me, so I wouldn't get too involved. I think my mother approved of that. And so anyhow, my mother decided that it was when I was graduating in June of '44 that I should have a party just before I went into the Navy. I was going to go into the Navy in August the 1st. And so actually that was my official signing up for the Navy, but I didn't actually leave until the 8th to go to Jacksonville for, so we had this party, and Anna Mae was there with her girlfriend, Becky, and so the party was just about over, and we were all saying goodbye at our house, 17 Shell Road, Cornish Point, New Jersey.
How about that?
Yeah, my hometown. And Anna Mae decided that it was time to leave, and so she started heading out the back door with Becky. And so I you know, went out with them, and Anna Mae just grabbed a hold of me and kissed me.
Uh-oh.
And then she ran off laughing and saying, I did it, Becky, I did it. I had no idea that it was that close. But anyhow, it was a fun thing. And then I went in the Navy.
Mhm.
And that's where it really began.
That's where the fun started.
Yeah. We took a train to Jacksonville on the 8th of August, 1944. And the war was still going on. And we were making great headway at that time. But there was still a lot of Japanese that were trying to put us down. And they were getting desperate because I think they knew they were losing. And so wasn't too much after that they decided to have the kamikaze, which meant divine wind.
Right.
But that didn't start until 45, I don't think. Anyhow,
So how did you get in the Navy? I mean, how old were you when you joined?
I was 17.
You're 17.
So in January I was 17, January 44. And so I was 17 and a half. And, my mother signed for me and my dad agreed. So it was not a big deal. Everybody was doing that. Everybody was.
Yeah.
All the kids wanted to help.
Right.
We were doing, it's a funny thing was, and I want to just do a little sideline on this one.
Right.
People in the United States at that time, people in America, very patriotic, and they were always making sacrifices. We recycled newspapers. We were in the Boy Scouts. I was in the Boy Scouts and then the Sea Scouts later, and we always gathered up newspapers and tin cans and things like that, and recycled that stuff, old tires, and we did all kinds of recycling at that time
Yeah.
for the war effort,
Right.
so they could use it to build tanks and guns and stuff like that. So we go around and make sure that there were nothing going to go to the landfill that was could be useful for the war effort.
Right.
So we did a lot of things like that. By the way, at that time, my father was a civil guard or something like that, I forget. He wore an armband and he had a nightstick. That's what they did. That's what all the men did. And so everybody was involved. Everybody in the families, with the exception of one thing. They, about the Japanese people who had grown up in the United States. A lot of them were citizens, and they were put in intern camps. Well, on the East Coast, they did the same kind of thing with Germans.
Did they?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So it wasn't as well known or as intense as it was with the Japanese, but even in the small towns, they were always, if there was a German-speaking person, or if they knew there was a German running a store or something like that, they were suspect.
Sure.
Because they thought maybe they were spies, maybe they were going to be doing something to the American government, or to to something that was valuable to society. So anyhow, and we were encouraged to report any Germans that were in our area. So I don't know that there were a couple of them in our town, in our village. By the way, our village was only 2,000 people. This DuPont village. So anyhow, that's part of the support that the families gave, and of course, about the rationing of the gasoline, the butter, the eggs, and even Lucky Strike had to give up their color green that they were using for the cigarette covers, and then they made a big deal out of that, and they said Lucky Strike Green has gone to war. So that was on the radio. So
well, they got a whole bunch of they got a whole generation of young soldiers addicted to tobacco.
that's right.
They give them away.
They gave us cartons of cigarettes, knowing that we were going to take them ashore. We either smoked them ourselves, and I never did, or we would take them ashore.
Good currency too, aren't they?
Use them for currency. Use them, and everybody wanted the cigarettes in Europe and Japan or wherever. I mean, France, yeah, all over the place. So anyhow, even after the war, there was still good currency. You could trade cigarettes for gold jewelry, things like that.
Sure.
Very valuable. Trade a carton or maybe even just a pack, and that's what usually would get you a lot of what you wanted. So anyhow, getting back to the story of from high school, took the train and took 2 days to get from Philadelphia, and I think I got on at Wilmington, Delaware, and took 2 days. And I remember one night we went off on the side track, and just stayed there all night long. And so the guys slept in their seats while we were on our way to boot camp. And it was, carloads of guys. No women, just men, or just boys, really.
Right.
So we got to Jacksonville and found out we were going to be there 6 weeks. And the first 3 weeks, we couldn't even leave the compound where the barracks was. And so we you go out and you march and you get indoctrinated into what the military was all about, and they didn't tell us an awful lot about what we were going to be doing. But they did give us testing, and and of course we had, by this time we found out how important it was to have our sea bag full of uniforms kept neat and organized all the time, and we had to keep our shoes polished. But the testing that we got was on what kind of program do you want to do, and for the combat air crewmen, people who were going to be combat air crewmen could go one of three ways. One was aircraft engines, another one was aviation ordnance, and the third one was aviation electronics, in which, all the instruments and the radios and all that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Well, I took all those tests and passed them all, with no problem at all. And then there was a kid named Bob Cordry, and he and I kind of grown up together, and he couldn't make it except for aviation ordnance. And so he said, "Jim, would you go in ordnance with me when we go to school?" And I said, "Okay." I should have gone to electronics or aircraft and engines.
Yeah.
But, I was just trying to be nice to my buddy.
You're 17.
Yeah, I was 17. And so I signed up for aviation ordnance. Well, the second 3 weeks, we were allowed to go away from our little compound where the barracks was, and we were allowed to go to the exchange and get ice cream. And of course we were getting $21 a month. $21 a day once a month. There was a song by that. And so we'd get ice cream and maybe candy or something like that, and then happily go back and lord it over the guys that couldn't get out of the way, couldn't leave the compound, and because we were the big shots by that time. 3 weeks. the old salts.
Yeah.
And it was fun, you know. I loved everything I did. I loved everything I did. I never really got upset about anything. So anyhow, from there, after the 6 weeks were up, they sent us to Norman, Oklahoma for the aviation ordnance program. And that's when I found out that I was going to learn about bombs and fuses and machine guns and taking all those things apart, and how do the bombs work, how do the fuses work, and what do you have to be careful about. Safety was a big issue. So we disassembled machine guns and handguns, the .45 caliber and 38 Smith & Wesson. And then we, after, I don't know, it was about 4 or 5 months of doing that, learning all about aviation ordnance, torpedoes, and of course we couldn't do anything with those except load them onto the airplanes. Being in Norman, Oklahoma, it was some distance to, for the weekends, where we get Liberty, yay! And so we had a little Liberty card that allowed us to get off the base, off the campus, because that's where, what was it, Oklahoma State University? I think that's what the university was, where we had our classes. And then we went to Oklahoma City on the weekends, and we had to take a streetcar through Enid, Oklahoma, and all the way up to Oklahoma City. And you know, all those things get vague, Mark, mm-hmm. where I don't remember how I got to the streetcar, and I don't remember how I got from the streetcar to the USO in Oklahoma City. Couldn't have been too far. Might have walked, I don't know. But we didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't take taxis.
Well, that was definitely a while ago. Yeah.
That's a while ago, 1944.
Yeah.
And you know, you do those things and you don't, they just come automatically. You find out how to do it once and then you forget it. You did it. And, but we used to go there on the weekends a lot.
So where was the first place you were deployed to?
Well, after going through the school, I'll get to that in a minute, but after we gone to school for aviation ordnance, then they extended my stay there, and so they put me through radar school, where I'd learn about how to detect aircraft or ships or anything like that using radar. And it was a circular sweeping thing. Right. And they'd go beep, beep, beep. And then they put me through radio operator school. So it was a combination of a lot of things that I was going to have to be exposed to that I would be using as a combat air crewman. And so we left there and we were sent to get our actual gunnery training in Miami. And in Miami, it was an old hotel that had been converted to a chicken coop. It was a big, beautiful place on 36 Southwest Street. And then for the war, Embry-Riddle set up a training school there for pilots. And by the time I got there, they weren't training pilots anymore, but they were training gunners. They were training people who would be acting as combat air crewmen. And that's the kind of subjects that we had to study. And we were actually getting out on the field and firing guns. And one of them was skeet. And skeet was, shotguns, where they have mark, pull, and the birds would go, and you're supposed to give them a certain lead for where you're going to fire them. And I did beautifully. I did very well. A lot of kids couldn't do it because they would shoot directly at the thing, and by the time the projectiles got there, that thing was over here, and so they missed.
Right.
But I got out of one day, out of 300, I got something like 275 or something like that, and which it was just automatic.
Yeah.
I don't know how I did that.
It's a simple trick. You either get that lead part or you don't.
Yeah.
Right.
And
you gotta shoot to where that bird's gonna be.
And of course, you got a nice spray pattern
Yeah.
going out, so
You're gonna catch it.
you don't have to be right on it.
Right.
So that's what we had to do with that. And by that time, it was time to go to Opelika, where there was an air base there, and they put me in. That was the first time I actually got into an airplane, and so they put us into. They gave us flight training and all that, and they put us into the TBF, the Grumman Avenger, and we were supposed to learn, practice firing at sleeves. They would tow, an airplane would go by towing a sleeve, a big nylon banner. And we fire on that and try not to hit the airplane.
Right.
We never did.
Did they put their least favorite pilot in that plane?
Yeah. And I did very well on that, but I was in the ball turret, had a 50 caliber machine gun, and so as the thing went by, I knew about lead and I knew about elevation and the trajectory that the shell would take, the bullets would take, and so I was able to calculate that in my head.
Right.
And it was just a natural thing for me. I don't know how I did that, but those things just came natural to me. But my radio man down below had two 30 caliber machine guns, and he was scared of guns. So he asked me to shoot for him. Well, that cost me becoming a third-class petty officer because they calculated how many hits and kind of averaged out with what he had done. Mm-hmm. And so I missed getting third class. There was one guy that got it. It was not too far beyond what I was. Here comes the rain.
Yep.
Boy, it's dumping now.
Coming down.
Yeah. It looks like it's going to last a while too. So anyhow, that was something that we had to do to practice the gunnery and get experience at actually hitting something that was moving target and evaluating our lead and trajectory calculations. So, and from there, of course, by that time I was seaman first class, like third. From there, I was sent to, where was it I went next? Oh, we stayed there. And from there, we were just flying over the Caribbean and the South Atlantic, rather the southeastern U.S. part of the Atlantic, and we were supposed to be looking for submarines, which I never saw. But there were a lot of submarines that had come through there and had been sunk by people just before me, and by the real pros that knew what they were doing.
Right.
So by that time, it was, I guess, about May or June, and they decided that it's okay, you got enough training, we're going to send you to Detroit, and you're going to be flying the torpedo bombers. And while I was there, I didn't have to load any torpedoes, but I did hoist 100-pound bombs, and I loaded all the guns, and we cleaned them and all that sort of stuff. We were sent to Detroit, and actually Grosse Ile, Michigan, which was a pretty big island. Grosse Ile means big island. In the Detroit River, I think it was, to get ready for carrier qualifications, because they were going to be sending people from there. And you probably know that the Naval Aviation Museum here has a lot of airplanes that were rebuilt. They were from being going on the carriers. They had one of the aircraft carriers, the two aircraft carriers, was called the Wolverine. That's the one I was supposed to be getting the carrier qualifications on, where we would land on the carrier and take off from the carrier, and then after proving that we could do it safely, we were going to be deployed to Japan, or a staging area where we would be joining the invasion of Japan. And
Yeah.
that was going to be in August or somewhere around that time frame. We never did get an exact date. But so we're sitting there in Grosse Ile, just waiting for our turn to be carrier qualified, and knowing, we knew that airplanes were dribbling off the end of the
Sure.
carrier. And I don't know how long that runway was or the deck was on the carriers, but they were converted cargo ships, maybe 500, 600 feet, I guess. And then there were also people who were flying in, trying to land, and crashed into the barricades or missed the hook.
Right.
And then there were some that actually hit the fantail of the ship. And then there were some that didn't even quite make it to there, and they dropped in the water.
Right.
So there were guys killed, and there were a lot of airplanes that wound up in the bottom of Lake Michigan. And as I started to tell you, that's where we got a lot of those airplanes that have been restored
For the museum?
for the museum, Naval Aviation Museum. So anyhow, we're there waiting for our turn to go through the carrier qualifications for the invasion. And all of a sudden, the bombs were dropped, the nuclear bombs. And Enola Gay, Tibbets, I guess his name was, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war. So I never went.
Yeah.
I never got to be a hero. Yeah. Of course, a lot of the
Destined to be.
TBFs got shot down, and a lot of guys got killed. Torpedo 8 was one of those squadrons where they lost a whole bunch of TBFs in one sortie, in one mission, and only one got back out of the entire group that went. So,
But you eventually wound up in Europe, right?
that was after the war.
That was after the war.
Yeah. And well, anyhow, we did. I've got to finish this off on that
Right.
thing. We did celebrate the war ending. We went downtown in Detroit and Woodruff, and man, there were thousands and thousands of people all over the street waving their hands and singing, oh, God bless America, and got flags and all that sort of stuff. They were so happy. And then they'd see these young sailors in their whites, and the girls would grab them and kiss them, and we weren't even heroes. We were just kids.
Yeah.
But and they take the sailors home with them, and you know, it was fun.
Yeah.
And one girl, real cute girl, came up to me and took me home to Hamtramck, which was a Polish section of Detroit. And her father just beamed.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was so happy to see a sailor there. I have no idea how I got home, back to the base. You know, that was all vague.
That happens to sailors.
So after that, there's a little bit of a blur about what happened. I think I was sent from there to Norfolk. Yes, I was. And in October of '45, after the bombing and the end of the war, I went to. I was sent to Norfolk to be processed out, just like everybody else. And they said, okay, do you want to extend? And we'll give you so much money if you want to extend, and then like $200. So it was a big deal then. And you can extend for 2 years, and then you go into the reserves. And I said, I'll take it. So I did in 1945. By that time, I was sent to a squadron. I think it was VF-84 or something like that, fighter squadron. No, I sent to Chincoteague, Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
And Chincoteague had the SB-2Cs. Which was a scout bomber, a Curtiss scout bomber, SB-2C Helldiver. And of course I was in the back seat of that one. And my first flight with it, I don't know why I wasn't nervous or anything, but I had eaten some junk food, some cookies, and a few other things that I ate. And the pilot decided he was going to try everything out and test the airplane while I was in the back seat. And I got sick. It did. It caught me totally by surprise because I had never been sick before. And everything that I had just finished eating came up.
I hope you had your barf bag with you.
I didn't. It was sudden. I didn't have a barf bag. I didn't expect to get sick.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I flew in those for a while at Chincoteague, Virginia. And by the way, that was the piece of cake to leave the base and go out to Route 13 and just hitchhike on up to New Jersey, where my family was. And so that's where we.
That's an interesting place, Chincoteague.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where the wild horses are.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of history there that I didn't
Yeah.
realize.
Yeah.
I had no idea. So anyhow, that's the
That's your military career?
not quite, because by that time I was. They decided they didn't need the SB-2Cs to fly from there anymore, and so I was reassigned because I had signed up for 2 years. I was reassigned to an aircraft carrier, and it was a new aircraft carrier. It was the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt, the FDR CVA 42, I think it was. It's called Foodie-Roo, we called it. And the FDR was one of the top carriers at that time. It was a Midway class. There were 3 carriers: Midway, FDR, and Carl C. 41, 42, and 43. And those carriers were the state of the art at that time. Mm-hmm. So here I was, not flying.
Yeah.
And I was in the I was working with a squadron of F4U. It's a bent wing airplane, fighter.
It's too early for me.
Yeah. So it was
You're
fighters.
talking about the F4, the jet F4.
No. This is props, strictly props. So that was the airplane that I was working on. But as an ordnanceman by this time, where I would load the bombs on the wings and load all the guns and keep the guns clean. They had 20 millimeter cannons in there then. And so that was my job with that, and we finally got a chance to, in 1946, to get aboard the carrier. And by this time, because I was assigned to it when it was commissioned, I was considered to be a plank owner, which is kind of like a virtual honor to be a plank owner of a ship. And so the FDR was mine, my first ship that I was on. And you know, if you're when something gets commissioned, when a ship or an air station or anything gets commissioned and you happen to be assigned to them, you are the plank owner of that particular facility or that vehicle. So I went aboard, I guess in 1946, in the summer of 46, and went aboard, and we went to a cruise. The first cruise we went to was in Guantanamo.
Really?
For a test, yeah, in the 40s.
All right.
And just to check out the carrier operations. Mm-hmm. And that's a I forget what the test is that they call that. That'll come to me. But then after that we were deployed again, and the ship was stationed at Norfolk by this time. And so we were deployed again for a shakedown cruise. That's what it was, shakedown cruise. Mm-hmm. That we went to Guantanamo, and then on from there across the equator. And so I went from being a pollywog to a shellback.
That was the actual
and
name,
you had to get
pollywog?
initiated. You had to get initiated. They had a big tube, big fabric tube that you had to crawl through with all the garbage in it. And that was just one of the things. And they swat you with shillelaghs. So it's a lot of fun. But then they give you a certificate for that, and I have no idea where mine is. I think it got lost in the shuffle. So we went to Brazil. We went to Rio de Janeiro for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think I have some pictures of this.
Yeah. And that's when I met Lyra Ine Maria Braganza, Ferreira Braganza de Almeida of Lua Cernada Vaquero, apartment 52, Flamenco in Rio de Janeiro. So that was her name and address in Portuguese.
Yeah.
So I just happened to meet her walking down the street with a couple of the guys, and she wanted to speak English.
Yeah.
And so she stopped me, and she was with her father and mother. And then she said, "My father wants to know if he can come aboard the aircraft carrier." And she said that in perfect English. Found out later she spoke 5 languages.
Yeah.
English, Spanish, French, German, Portuguese. Is that 4 or 5?
That's 5.
Anyhow, she spoke 5 languages. And her father was a banker. So I said, yeah, we can do that because Sunday we're going to be having open house. And so they came aboard, and by this time I was accepted into the Brazilian society, whatever that was. And they gave me a tour of the beaches and all that sort of stuff. And then she started, she wanted to go to America and go to school in the United States. From that point on, she was my girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
One of many, of course. I was writing to all the girls back in the States. But I wrote to Lyra for 3 years before I finally kind of just dropped it. I don't know why I dropped it.
Yeah. You know what happened to her?
No, I don't. But she probably got to the States to go to college or something.
Right.
So subsequent to that, we got deployed to the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean tour was, we were going to be the first ship to go through there on an ambassador type of tour. Diplomatic tour or whatever. And first aircraft carrier to go through. And it only turned out to be 2 months. And you know, most of these Mediterranean cruises are 6 or 7 months.
Right.
And so you go for 2 months, and they take you to Naples, to Cannes, to in France, the Côte d'Azur, and we went to Morocco, Algiers, Oran, which I don't think exists as Oran anymore, and the island Malta. I'll tell you about Malta in a minute. And we went to Crete and Suda Crete and Cyprus. And at that time we also went to Turkey. In 2 months we went to all these different places.
You're busy.
And it was just a show, and to Athens, or Piraeus really, in Greece. Because we're just making a show of the naval forces and the fact that we were the ambassadors of freedom and peace. And we wanted people to know that we were on their side, you know, to maintain the peace of the world if we could. So, getting back to Malta, Valletta, Malta was a British stronghold at one time. And so we went into Valletta, we anchored out, and it just so happens that I was wearing my whites, and was not a drinker at all. I would have a beer or a glass of wine or something like that sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And I got to walking down the street with a couple of my buddies, and they kept stopping for beer or stopping for wine, and so I had more than one. And by this time I was getting a little happy, and I heard some music walking down this back street. I heard some music coming out of this building, and people singing and making a ruckus and having a good time, and there's a big stairway. I remember that big stairway going up there. So I just walked up and went to the door, and they saw me there at the door, and they invited me in. Hey, come on in, Yank. You know. And so I went in, and they were all drunk, and they got me to where I was feeling pretty high. So we started changing hats, you know. Mm-hmm. I gave my hat. You mean? Yeah. And exchanging hats, and they gave me their hat. And so one guy gave me his hat, and he took mine. And then we decided, well, let's go one beyond that, and we'll take the neckerchief off. And then they had the neckerchief, and the next thing was the white jacket, the part of the uniform. Before you know it, my whole uniform was on him, and I had his. Yeah. And so then I had to go back to the ship, and I'm still happy, you know. And so I get down to the landing area to get on the little boat to go out to the ship that was anchored out, and I'm coming up the ladder in this uniform, and the guy says to me, the officer of the deck says, sorry, sir, you can't come aboard. I said, yeah, but this is my ship. This is where I am. And he said, are you American? I said, yeah, I'm a sailor here. He said, where'd you get that uniform? Some guy, I don't know why, you know, we changed uniforms. And he says, that explains it. There was a British guy came aboard in a white uniform, a white sailor's uniform, and he was below decks, and he says, and he had said to somebody, I say, mate, where's the mess? And right away we became suspicious. So, anyhow, I came back in, and I don't know what they did with the guy, but I went to bed, and I was in I had three bunks, mm-hmm. And I was on the top bunk, I guess, and about 6 o'clock in the morning, I'm still sleeping, 6 or 7, and the master at arms comes in, and he says, Crumlish. By the way, I'm still a seaman by that time. Crumlish. Yeah, what do you want? The captain wants to see you. Me? He said, yeah, get dressed and get out there immediately. He wants to see you right now. So I got dressed and went to the captain's quarters, and here's this British admiral and our admiral and the captain all sitting in there. Yeah. And they want to know about this international incident that I just caused. Yeah. And I said, I didn't know, what's the big deal? To me it was no big deal, right? So Anyhow, and so while I'm telling the story about how this all happened, I could see them turning around, snickering and laughing. And so I got off with it. But, oh man, it was something else, because here I was, just a kid, 18 years old, I guess. And I almost caused an international incident. I would, well, anyhow.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
South of France, on the Côte d'Azur, we went to just walking down the street. There are several things that happened there in Cannes. And I was walking down the street one time in the afternoon. You get off Liberty for afternoon. You have to be back about 11 o'clock or so. And most of the guys would go to the bars. I didn't. Very rare that I went to a bar. And I went to, I got to a point where we were at Juan de Lapin, I think it was. I'm not exactly sure, but I think it was Juan de Lapin, which is between Cannes and Nice in France, on the south coast there. Côte d'Azur meaning coast of blue, the blue coast. So I decided, okay, this is a pretty cool looking place. And I decided to test some of the back streets going up the hill. And because that's where the perfume areas were, where they're making the perfumes. And I was going to get some for my sisters and some of my girlfriends back in the States. And I just happened to walk past this place where there was a lady standing in the doorway, and she saw me in my white sailor uniform by myself, because the guys I was with stopped at a bar. And so she invited me in, started talking to me and invited me in. And here was this kind of middle-aged, in the way I'm looking at it now, was middle-aged.
How old were you?
I was 18.
18?
Yeah.
Everybody seems old when you're 18.
Yeah. And anyhow, there was art all over the place, all over the walls, and it was one of these stone, it looked like stone house on the hillside there, on that right up at the street level. And so I walked in, and she introduced me to this guy, and this is Mr. Picasso. And so I assumed that it was Pablo Picasso, and I'd heard his name before, but I didn't have any idea what that all meant, and whether or not he was anybody important.
No, was he famous by then?
I don't know.
1945?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
It was 1946.
46.
Yeah. So anyhow, I have no idea. And so I'm just looking around at some of the art, and they offered me a drink, which I accepted. And for some reason or other, they wanted to give me a little gift before I left, and he handed me a little cross, you know, and the cross was made out of ceramic and it had little flowers on it. It was no more than about an inch and a half high. And so I would imagine that it was something that he had made. Yeah, because he had sculptures in there and a lot of little souvenir type things. But so that to me was the kind of a highlight of that little visit.
Right.
In
What town was this?
Cannes. Or Juan de Le Pen. I believe that's where he lived at that time.
Uh-huh.
And that's just an extension of Cannes
Right.
toward the east. And so I left there, and I had this thing in my pocket, and I decided, okay, well, I'll do some more walking around. It's still early, and it was about maybe 5 or 6 o'clock, and I went down the street, down the main road along the waterfront, and I've heard a lot of music coming out of this one building, and I looked at a sign on the outside, and it said "Whiskey a Go-Go." You ever hear of Whiskey a Go-Go? Well, that must have been the original.
Yeah.
And I went in, and there were a bunch of young girls and guys
And this was in
dancing.
Cannes too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or Juan de Le Pen. I don't remember exactly what part it was in. But I went in and I noticed that all the girls had very small waists. And I was, wow, man, this is cool. And I found out that they had what they called a ceinture, and which means it cinch up your waist. And it was made out of rubber, I guess, you know, and so the things were about that wide, and they had different kinds of buckles on them in the front. You know, it's like kind of like half jewelry, maybe.
Right.
So I got to talking to some of those kids, and I didn't dance with any of the girls, but that was an interesting thing to me. And so I went back to the ship, and one of the guys who was an aviation ordnanceman in the shop was an artist. So I told him about this ceinture, and he decided that he and I were going to go in the business of making these when we got back to the States. And he would design the buckles, and I'd get my, and we'd have to rename it and call it a BG. My sister's name was Betty Jean. And so BG was going to be on the waist of every girl in Carney's Point.
Or so you hoped.
Yeah, and we were going to sell millions of these things.
Of course.
So, of course, we had no idea what the hell we were doing. Walking down the street, Madame Lelou, and she had 2 little girls with her and a little boy. One was Nellie Lelou. I don't know what the other girl's name was, but Guy Lelou was the little boy, and I think he was older than the girls. But he was no more than about 8 or 9 years old. And she wanted to go aboard the aircraft carrier, so I said, okay. And again, Sunday was going to be open house for guests. And so I had them aboard, gave them the grand tour, and so I became their American cousins by that time.
Yeah.
And so I went out, and I've got a couple of pictures somewhere.
Yeah, I think I have
The
one
kids.
of those pictures in digital form.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I would put it in the film.
Yeah. So anyhow, that's And I had, by this time, had bought some civilian clothes. And so that picture that you have
Right.
probably has me
You're
in
civilian
slacks
clothes,
and a shirt, something like
yes.
this.
Sweater on too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they wrote to me, and I, you know, I didn't write back much, but about 10 years later, that was in 46. No, it was later than that, 60. I went back, and I went looking for them, and I found them.
Yeah.
And by this time, little Nellie had grown up, and she was pregnant. So anyhow, where were we? We were at,
You were telling me crazy stories.
yeah, a lot of crazy stories.
Yeah.
Monaco. We didn't go to Monaco that time. But in Greece. We went to Athens, or Piraeus. That's where the ship anchored out. And it's not too far from Athens. And when we went ashore at that time, they were giving a very high rate of drachma for $1. So it was like 10,000 drachma for $1, and the normal rate was maybe one or 2,000. And so it was to get money, get American dollars into the Greek banks,
Super.
give people a chance to, give the sailors a chance to buy Greek products. And so that's when I got a lot of little gold jewelry and lavaliers and things like that that I could bring home to my family, my sisters, my mother, my girlfriends, a bunch of girls. Too many. Yeah. And so in Greece, I became fascinated with things in Greece because I couldn't understand how those people were able to live, because the economy was so far down. People didn't have any food
Yeah.
and things like that. So you can imagine what a pack of cigarettes would do
Oh yeah.
at that time.
Buy you the world.
Yeah. And so another thing in that particular cruise, by the way, when we were at sea between ports, we were busy. We were working, and the guys were flying the Corsair, the F4U Corsair,
Okay.
the bent wing fighter, the gull wing fighter. That's what I was working on at that time. But they were flying, between. It might have only been a couple of days, 2 or 3 days, but they had to keep busy and keep, exercising their skills. So they went to, in between times, maybe just 2 or 3 days between ports, which was pretty cool for us. We loved it. And so one of the places we went, of course, was Naples. Naples, Italy was the, I guess it was kind of like the primary place and that they stopped. And so we got a chance to walk through the back streets of Naples, and I went to Sorrento, I went to Vesuvius, Pompeii, and saw all those things, did the regular tours.
Those pictures right behind you are of Capri, which is right there by
Yeah,
Vesuvius.
we went to Capri and the Blue Grotto.
Mm-hmm. Got something in it.
Oh, it's gorgeous, gorgeous, yeah.
Stunning.
And the other thing that we did many times, I was singing in the Catholic choir, and so we were invited many times to go to a cathedral in the country where we were visiting, and like for instance in Mallorca, Palma, Mallorca, an island off Spain, big island in the Balearic Islands, and that was the biggest of the Balearic Islands. So we went up, I remember going up this big hill, and there's this huge cathedral sitting on top of the hill. You could see it from many miles away, out at sea. We sang there, we sang the Mass. They always had a high Mass. And another place was Sardinia, yeah, not Corsica, but Sardinia was the Italian island across Italy. There are two islands, Sardinia and Corsica, and so in the Mediterranean. So we went there and we sang in that place, and we had to walk a long distance to get into the church. But you know, every one of those experiences was just beautiful. One lieutenant was our choir director, and he was good. I guess maybe about 20 guys, 20 sailors that went to all these places to sing in the cathedrals, or maybe just a church. So we, another place we stopped in Mallorca was Palencia Bay, which was kind of a lowland type area, and it was just kind of very quiet, and it was north end of the island, Palencia Bay. Yeah.